Okay. So it's 2 after, so I am going to start the webinar, and it is being recorded and will be made available to the club and the club members that cannot make it or that make it in late, so that you don't miss anything. I want to first thank the American Eskimo Dog Club America for asking me to speak to your group tonight. And I also want to thank all of you individually whose pictures of your dogs I stole off your websites to populate the PowerPoints tonight. So if you see your dogs there, you can, applaud that your dog made it into the presentation, and I thank you for that. So one title of the webinar tonight is using the tools of the OFA website to improve the health of American Eskimo dogs. I was asked to address that specifically, and so we're going to go into that and show you. We'll go onto the website and I'll show you areas you can go and things that you can look up to provide more information for you about your breed, and as well as about your breedings and prospective mates for your matings and so forth. But it's also an overview of the genetic health of the American Eskimo dog. And being a 2-hour webinar that is scheduled for, I usually do a 3-hour seminar at National Specialties in person to the assembled breeders that encompasses a lot more than what we're going to cover tonight. But I will allude to a number of those messages. And even though I haven't analyzed or looked up or researched the data for your breed specifically, I do have some generic handouts and articles that have been published in the past on those subjects, and I will provide those to your club as well. So about me, I am a member of the board of directors of the OFA, the Canine Health Information Center. The OFA is the largest repository of health testing information on dogs. We have over 20 million health test results on dogs and some on cats as well, on over 3 million dogs. And so we will go over that with you. It is a not-for-profit animal health foundation. I am a member of the board. The board members are non-paid positions, volunteer positions that we undertake with scientists and breeders represented. I am also a full-time small animal practitioner, solo practitioner in Connecticut. My hospital is Freshwater Veterinary Hospital. And I take care of, I'm a general practitioner. I take care of dogs and cats all day. And so pretty much I see what is produced by breeders, by, shelters, by, people that are just breeding their dogs in their backyards and so forth, and what's provided to the public in dogs and cats. So I do see, after over 40 years of practice, what are the common things that we see, what are the uncommon things that we see, what are the practices that breeders have done when I see a new puppy or kitten in the practice, because we have people bring all of their paperwork that's been provided by the breeder, so I can see what health testing's done, what kind of guarantees are being made, and so forth. So I do have that kind of insight into dogs and cats. I also am a breeder, and my breed is Gordon Setters. I call myself a breeder, even though my wife makes all the breeding decisions. But this is our boy Bobby, and this was the day that he attained his junior hunter title. The Gordon Setter is a hunting breed, and we like to put hunting titles on our dogs just to show that they have the natural abilities that the breed was bred for. To celebrate his day, we spent about 2 hours cleaning all the sticks out of his coat for that day. This is his litter mate, Maddie, and this is her taking breed at a little dog show in New York City. So we were very proud of her, and this was 3 years after her mother also took breed at Westminster, and both of those are homebred dogs. And so we're very proud of the dogs that we breed. We're going to be doing some polling today. And so I want to just use this as an orientation poll for you. And so there's two ways that we can do the polling. If you go on your phones to the website pollev.com/AEDCA, the poll questions will pop up on your screen and you can just tap the answers and make it easy for you. If you don't have access to a website, but you want to text, you're going to text to the address 22333, and then you're going to one time only type in AEDCA and hit send. And then after that, you're going to answer you love American Eskimo Dogs with an A, or you love Siamese cats with a B. And whoops. And so this is just to orient all of you. Once you're on that text box or on that web page, all of the poll questions will pop up automatically, or that you can answer them by text automatically. So again, it's pollev.com/AEDCA. And you can just tap your answer. If it asks you to register, you don't have to register. This is all anonymous. So no one is going to see who's answering what questions. I have no access as to who's answering the questions. So you don't have to do any registration. And the same thing with the texting to address 22333. One time only, tap AEDCA and hit send. And after that, you can type A for American Eskimo Dogs or B if you love Siamese cats. So we have 12 people that have responded. I guess you could also go to this Q code or Q, whatever the codes are called, with your camera, and that will automatically pop up that web page for you as well. So let's see what your responses are. So we've got 100% of you love American Eskimo Dogs, and none of you love Siamese cats, which is good, because if we had Siamese cat people in here, it would be a very long 2 hours for them to sit through. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next poll. If you haven't been able to orient to it, we're just going to go to the next one, and you can try to orient yourself there. So the same thing, this should pop up for those of you on a web page, or if you're using the texting, this is a free form poll. And the question is, what is the greatest health issue of American Eskimo Dogs? And you can type it in. You don't have to use full sentences if you don't want to. There is no moderation here. So let's, no profanity, please. And let's just see what people are answering in terms of the greatest genetic health issue of American Eskimo Dogs. We've got missing teeth, hip dysplasia, diabetes, breeder apathy. Okay, so the people that aren't watching tonight, diabetes, losing pigment. I can make jokes. You've got a white dog, but I do understand you're talking about losing pigment on the nose and on the mucocutaneous junctions and so forth. PRA, progressive retinal atrophy, breeder ignorance, cancer, cataracts. Is that juvenile or senile? And you can answer more than once if you'd like. Or the type of cataract. I think you can answer more than once. Okay, well, we'll go through that. If there are questions, you can hit chat and ask some questions. So I have the chat box open, and I can keep an eye on that. And we also, at the end of the webinar, I have time allotted for questions as well. Okay. Last question for right now. What are your questions concerning the genetic health of American Eskimo Dogs? So what what are you hoping to hear from me tonight during the webinar about the genetic health of your breed? Okay, what testing should be performed prior to breeding? So we will address that. How can we make the best choices to avoid some of the genetic diseases that we cannot test for? So I will address that as well. Do you consider the breed to be genetically diverse? And I will speak to that as well, although I haven't analyzed the breed as I would in a full seminar. Clarity around DM, and I'm assuming that's degenerative myelopathy because you also have a DM, diabetes mellitus, but I'm assuming that's degenerative myelopathy. We will address that. Common health issues and severity of rare health issues. We will talk about that. How is the science behind degenerative myelopathy different from the science or testing for PRA? So I will address that, PRA and degenerative myelopathy. Eye problems other than PRA. We will address all of those so far, so that's good. I have prepared properly. Okay. All right, so I'm going to move on now. And again, if there are questions, you can put them into the chat box and or address them at the end. Just took 2 Eskimos ophthalmologists today, and one has juvenile cataracts. The other one has hyperpigmentation and dilated and tortuous retinal veins. Okay, so we will address juvenile cataracts when we talk about the health survey results. And hyperpigmentation and dilated and tortuous retinal veins, those are symptoms. Those are not diagnoses of a disease process. Sometimes those are signs of PRA, but I would expect the ophthalmologist would have said to you, these are the early signs of PRA. So hopefully they are not. Sometimes dogs can have extra pigmentation and their veins might be a little bit redundant, and it's not necessarily a disease process. So really, your questions the ophthalmologist should have been, or hopefully would have been, well, what does that mean? Or what does this mean for my dog? Or what process does that represent? Because those are questions for ophthalmologists that I am not trained in and not able to answer for you today. Okay, so a large number of individuals in a breed population provides greater choices when making breeding decisions. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about right now in the early part of the webinar has to do with genetic diversity and about your breed and your breed's gene pool itself. So this is what we're talking about. Here somebody actually trained all of their dogs to shake paw with just their left front foot. So kind of interesting there. Okay. Selection. So the most important tool that we have in breeding is selection. It's not in breeding, it is in selecting who is going to breed and to whom we are going to breed them to. And that is what creates the breed, and that's what maintains the breed. So it's really the most important decision that we make in terms of the future of the breed. With each selected trait that we select for, or disorder that we select against, or traits that we select against, the proportion of the available gene pool decreases. So what do I mean by that? So if we say that this circle here represents the entire gene pool of the Esky breed, and then we decide that we are going to use a selection parameter, that we're only going to use dogs with normal hips, or that have a proper top line, or whatever our initial selection parameter is going to be, and we institute that selection parameter. Only those dogs that have that parameter are going to be who we're considering for breeding, and the rest of these dogs that do not have that parameter are we are no longer considering for breeding. And then say we have a genetic test for PRA. And so if we put that parameter, and these are all the dogs that have been tested in the breed for PRA that we have the results available for, and we only want those that don't carry the gene, and we're not considering those that are carriers of that defective gene for that form of PRA. And then there's something else that we feel is important, and then we put a selection parameter on, and then there's another genetic test that we have available to us. And very soon, what we recognize is that if we're going to include all of our selection parameters in determining what dog we're going to consider for breeding, we're left with just a very small portion of that gene pool where dogs reside that we are going to use for breeding or for consideration. So what does this tell us about selection? First thing that it tells us is that how we measure what we are selecting for or against better be accurate as best as we can to actually represent what our desire is for that trait or that disorder. Meaning, is our selection parameter valid for what we think that we're selecting for or against? If we think we're selecting for or against degenerative myelopathy or a certain trait, are we actually assessing our dogs properly for that trait or disorder and grouping them in a yes or no population? Or are we actually causing problems with our selection because we're eliminating dogs we shouldn't be eliminating, and really restricting the diversity of our choices out of our gene pool? So, and we'll talk more about diversity and so forth as we move on. So let's talk a little bit about the registration statistics of the American Eskimo dog. We're not going to go, all the way back to the origins here as a circus dog and the other areas that the breed was developed for up in the Yukon, and as a protector and an alarm barker for families and for individuals. But that's what the breed was developed for. So we're just going to go back. I'm going back to 1996 through last year, which was the last year, full year of registration for the breed. So this is the AKC population, the American Kennel Club registered American Eskimo dogs. And as we see, back in the mid-90s, the breed was more populous in terms of the number of dogs that were being registered, and went through a gradual decline in registrations. And this decline occurred across all breeds because of economic reasons, in terms of breeding, and for many other reasons. We saw a general decline across all breeds for a number of dogs registered for each breed. And then we see pretty much that we kind of fell into a range here. Here we're in the low 300s, the high 200s. We went down to the middle 200s and then back up to the higher 200s. And we have, we were down a little bit more just before COVID, and then actually the numbers have risen up since that time. And this also reflects what has happened across all breeds as well, that we did see declines that occurred for a couple of decades, and now we are seeing in the last 5 years or so a resurgence in numbers of purebred dogs being registered. So, so this is the basis for your breed now, is the high 200s in that regard. Your AKC rankings have shifted as well, but your AKC rankings also have to do with the numbers of breeds that have been added since 1996 and before then. And many of those breeds are low population breeds, very small breeds that have been added. There are a couple of very high population breeds, Australian Shepherds, and so forth that jumped way up into the rankings. But most of them came in below you in terms of popularity, and your breed is in the middle pack of breeds in terms of AKC registrations. In terms of litters registered, we can see here that once again there were a lot more litters being bred in the mid to late 1990s, and then we dropped down. I don't have a number for 2005. I apologize for that, but then we do see a stabilization, and then once again an increase in the last 5 years or so, which we have seen across most breeds. And one thing that we can do from the AKC information that has been provided to us is to look at litter size, or what they call litter complement. And so if we take, and it is the number of litters and the number of registered dogs, puppies from the litters. And what we see here for the last 12 years at least, in terms of the number of puppies per litter for your breed, is that number has not significantly changed over these years here. We did have a drop to 3.3 last year, but it's just a single year, and I can't, so that is probably an outlier. Things don't change in 1 year. You have to look more at the trends, but you have the 3.5, and you've got 3.5s down here, and 6s and 7s, and you've got a 9 right here, which is probably another outlier as well. It was a little bit on the high side from your average, but that's the average number of puppies per litter that has been produced from AKC registrations. And so for the first question that people have about genetic diversity is that they say, well, genetic diversity and inbreeding depression causes smaller litter size and greater genetic disease. And so, what we can see, at least from the last 12 years, is that we're not seeing a decrease in litter size in your breed. And so, we're not seeing that aspect of what someone would call inbreeding depression in that regard. And we'll address that further as we go along here. So here is just a graph of that data that shows the average. No, I'm sorry. So this is a graph of the percentage of registered American Eskimo dogs that are bred based on their birth years. And we kind of have to ignore the first 4 or 5 years worth, because you've got dogs that have not been bred yet that are going to be bred. And so that skews the numbers, so the dogs that were bred last year, that were born last year, none of them have been bred. They're only a year or less in age. And so really you want to look back a couple of years first and then look at your averages from there. And so as you see, we're averaging somewhere between 10 and 12% in that regard. And what I did is I took all of the AKC breeds and I broke the breeds down into thirds based on the population size, because very populous breeds, the percentage of dogs that are being bred are going to be much fewer than the rare breeds, where the percentage of dogs being bred are going to be much higher. So, so I broke them into the most populous third, the middle third, and then the lower third in terms of populations of all the breeds. And you fall right here for American Eskimo dogs in terms of the middle third. So here are the more populous breeds, and here are the less populous breeds in the third. So, so this would be the mean or the median between the breed, all of the breed sizes. So you're just a little bit below the mean in terms of your population size of dogs. And the average percentage of all dogs bred out of the middle 1/3 is 11.3%. And your average is 10.4% for this 7-year period that I calculated this out for a few years ago. And so what it shows us is that 10.4% of all Eskies that are born and registered with the AKC are then used for breeding, and it's just slightly below the average for this middle 1/3 of all AKC breeds. We see some breeds that have a much higher percent, closer to 20 for the Norwich Terrier, the Tibetan Spaniel, the American Hairless Terrier, and you've got some much lower, the Boerboel, the Lhasa, and so forth. But you're about average for the middle third there. But what does this tell us? That only 10.4% of dogs are being bred that are being born and registered with the AKC. It means that 90% of your dogs are not being bred and not passing on their genes to the next generation. So this tells us that we go through a genetic bottleneck with every generation of breeding, and it's based on selection, who we select for reproduction for the next generation. Because dogs that are not being used for breeding, their genes are lost to the future of your breed. You don't get them back. I mean, if you freeze semen and use them later on, but then that's kind of cheating because you're still using dogs from that year. You're just using them later on. And from the data, dogs born in each year, 10.4% is what your breed is breeding. So who we select for breeding becomes very, very important so that we don't cause issues with genetic diversity in our breed, and we don't lose the quality and the genetic diversity of our breed. And so all of us will agree that genetic diversity is important in a breed. What we don't agree upon is, what does genetic diversity actually mean, and how do we measure it? So that is something we will address as we continue on. So again, in the long seminar that I would do for a breed club, I would take a complete computerized database, pedigree database of your breed. I would take the AKC database, but that is a truncated database. It only goes back to the late 1970s. I would also take a computerized database that has been generated by someone in your breed, an enthusiast, someone internationally that hopefully would take your breed back to founders or as close to it as we can. And I would analyze it. I would go through influential ancestors and the influences over the decades and give you a complete analysis of your breed. So we're not doing that today. A lot of the concepts from that are found in an article that I wrote for the AKC Gazette back in the 1990s called The Ins and Outs of Pedigree Analysis, Genetic Diversity, and Genetic Disease Control. This article can be found in many, many places on the internet. If you want to Google ins and outs of pedigree and Bell, you would find the article in many places. One of the places you can find it is at the seriousdog.com website, but that's only one of many areas. But I'm not going to go into all of the concepts of that article with us tonight. But in order to understand about breeds, you have to understand about breed evolution and how different breeds develop. The development of breeds occurred through artificial selection for body type, color, coat type, behavior, and conformational aspects. That's how we create breeds. We're selecting on any number of combinations of those particular aspects. As breed lines become more specialized and stud books are closed, those who do not conform to the standard are removed from breeding. So we're only selecting those that conform to our breed standard or to what we wish to develop to become the breed. Studies of dog breeds estimate that they lose on average 35% of their genetic diversity through breed formation. And these are molecular genetic studies. And I will tell you that, that if we actually had studies that had the genetics of early members of breeds when we didn't have molecular genetics, you'd find that it's actually much more than 1/3 of the genes from the founding dogs that we lose. We lose a lot more than that when we establish breeds, because we are establishing and creating clones. We are establishing dogs that look alike, that in many aspects act alike, and reproduce themselves alike. So that, that is what we are doing. That is purposeful selection in terms of creating breeds. If we look at a pedigree of a population, so this is a typical pedigree, not of an American Eskimo dog, but of a different breed. But this is pretty much what they all look like. And this part of the pedigree right here is what you're used to looking at in a pedigree. Here's the individual. Here's the sire. Excuse me, the sire on the top and the dam on the bottom, the grandparents, and so forth as you go back. As you go back, you find that there is some line breeding and some individuals that appear multiple times in the pedigree as you move back. All the way back here is the founding of a breed. These are the founders or the original ancestors for the breed. And then these are matings that take place, and those dogs that reproduce what the original breeders were looking for are kept and maintained for reproduction, and those that do not are discarded. And so you have a lot of breeding and replacing and culling that goes on early on in the development of a breed. And then once you have dogs that are reproducing to a standard, and if that breed gains in popularity, which you would hope, then you have a period of breed expansion that goes on where that population then grows in terms of the number of individuals that are reproducing, as well as the diversity of individuals that are reproducing. And then what you see here, because this is a pedigree of just a single dog, you then see this diamond type shape where now that pedigree truncates into just the ancestors who are behind this individual dog, when the entire breed actually continues to go all the way up to here and all the way down to there to represent all of the individuals of the breed and not just the one individual whose pedigree we're looking at. So this is what a typical breed pedigree looks like and what can be analyzed with computerized programs when you have a complete or as complete breed pedigree database to work with. So here is one of my favorite comics, Get Fuzzy, and Rob is sitting there saying, "Ever heard the expression familiarity breeds contempt?" And Satchel sits and ponders, and he says, "No, in the dog world, we say familiarity breeds hip dysplasia." So this is what the general public thinks about purebred dogs, is that because they are inbred, because we have created breeds through inbreeding, that we have created disease. And so this is a misnomer, unfortunately, but it is what the public does believe in. And so let's talk about that a little bit. So what is homozygosity? Because this is the measurement that we're talking about in terms of measuring inbreeding. Homozygosity, and I'll get into more depth in the article and in a longer seminar, but homozygosity is the pairing of like genes in gene pairs. So we know that genes come in pairs, one from the sire and one from the dam, and that those genes are on paired chromosomes, and one of those chromosomes in each chromosomal pair came from the father, and the other one came from the mother. And it's the pairing of like genes in gene pairs due to inheritance from ancestors common to the sire and dam. So, and it doesn't matter if it's a large A and large A that are getting paired, or a little a and a little a getting paired. It doesn't matter if they're recessive or dominant. It's just that due to an individual appearing on both the sire and the dam's side of the pedigree, and their ability to pass a single gene on both sides of the pedigree that can get paired up in the offspring whose pedigree you're looking at, there is a measurable amount of homozygosity, meaning the same gene in that gene pair. Heterozygosity, hetero being different, is the pairing of unlike genes in gene pairs, so a large A paired with a little a. And if we talk about the percentage of all gene pairs in an individual that are homozygous, and if we say that their inbreeding coefficient or their homozygosity is 17%, then we expect 17% of their gene pairs to be homozygous due to ancestry with common ancestors in both the sire and the dam side of the pedigree. And if you take 100 and you subtract 17 and you come up with 83, that is the percentage of heterozygosity that we'd expect in the pedigree of the variable gene pairs in the pedigree. I'm not going to get into variable versus non-variable, but dogs are dogs through non-variable gene pairs. So you don't breed two dogs and get a cat. And within your breed non-variable gene pairs, you always breed two Eskies together, and you get another Eskie. You don't, all of a sudden get a Chihuahua and say, "Wow, that was kind of weird." So those are non-variable gene pairs, and that's not what we're talking about when we measure the homozygosity. We're talking about only those gene pairs that vary within your breed. So my next poll question for you is, are absolute levels of breed homozygosity and differences in homozygosity between individual dogs important? Is it important that one dog has a higher inbreeding coefficient than another? Or is it important that your breed's homozygosity is higher or lower than another breed's homozygosity in terms of considering it a healthy breed or a diverse breed and so forth? And if you have come in since after the polls that we did before, if you take your camera and you go to this Q code, a web page will show up that will pop up all these questions for you, and you can answer by tapping on the yes or no, or you can go to a web page, polev.com/AEDCA, and go to that web page, and the question will pop up. Or if you wish to text, you're texting to the address 22333. And if you're texting for the first time, you want to put in AEDCA, American Eskimo Dog Club of America, and hit send. And after that, you would just put A for yes or B for no, and to answer the question. Okay, so far we have 9 people that have answered. And for those of you that came later, the chat box is open. If you have questions, you can put them into the chat box, and I will address them, as well as we will have a question and answer session at the end. Okay, so let's reveal the responses. And so 67% of you say that absolute levels of homozygosity and differences between breeds and between individual dogs is important, and a third of you say no. Okay, I accept those answers. And the next question, why? Why did you answer that? Why do you believe that homozygosity, that the absolute number, is important or not so important? And then we'll talk some about that. Diversity? Yeah, you don't get points for that answer. That's the whole question, is about diversity. So I need a little more detail than that. Maintaining consistency to the standards, okay? Because you don't want the number to be too low. All right, that's interesting. And we'll talk about some of these things here. Type. So too high of a number results in a loss of diversity. That is correct. And so we're assuming that higher numbers give you, pass-on traits a little bit more than lower numbers. I'm concerned about the COI of the sire and the dam. That is, if you're concerned about anything, you need to be concerned about both the sire and the dam in genetic testing and whatever aspects, because each contributes 50% on average to the offspring. Consistency of the standard. You can get, in theory, it says that you can get more variability with lower COI or by outbreeding, because outbreeding will lower a COI and line breeding will increase the COI. And the difference between line breeding and outbreeding is you need to know what is the average COI of your breed. And if you're breeding to a number that's lower, then you're outbreeding. And if you're breeding to a number higher than the average for your breed, then you are line breeding. Not necessarily inbreeding, because I understand to a breeder, inbreeding is father-daughter or mother-son or full brother-sister, but certainly a higher number is an inbreeding coefficient, so you're increasing a measurable number. Okay, our gene pool of registered dogs is too few. We need to reach out to unshown dogs. Certainly your gene pool encompasses all of the dogs of your breed. And so even if dogs are not shown or are not necessarily part of the fancy and members of your clubs, but if they represent decent American Eskimo dogs, maybe even working American Eskimo dogs, then they certainly would be a valid and vital aspect of diversity in your breed, as well as breed populations from other parts of the country that may have originated from the same background, but may have diverged a little bit because they have gone to other continents where they are not mixing their genes as readily with American dogs' genes. Allows for the breed to have minor variations that can be associated with non-dominant genes. Actually, that answer has 2 points that pop into my mind. First, we talk about minor variations. We need variation within the breed in order to have selection. If I have something that I want, then I don't have, then I need variation in that factor so that I can select for those that have it and bring that into my breeding program, and vice versa. If I have something that I have and I don't want to lose, I want to select individuals that also have that trait or consideration. Can be associated with non-dominant genes. Certainly recessive genes don't express themselves as readily as dominant genes, and so sometimes you need to look for families that carry that trait that might be hidden in carriers for recessive traits that you want to try to fix, or if you're looking for recessive individuals that are expressing those recessive traits that are probably homozygous, that you want to look for those individuals. It may not necessarily be a dog that has a higher coefficient of inbreeding. They could have a lower coefficient. They're only homozygous at the gene pair that you're interested in that regard. So it's not necessarily directly correlated to their COI. Okay, let's talk about some of these things. So any selection over generations will create homozygosity, uniform, purposeful selection for breeding goals. If you're selecting for the same thing generation after generation, you're going to get homozygosity for the genes that control those traits that you're selecting for, and a loss of the genes that you are selecting against. And diminished frequencies of undesirable genes that you are selecting against. So that's what selection does for us in terms of what it does to the genes of our dogs. Any selection will cause a loss of genetic diversity. And this is something that we need to understand about purposeful breeding, which is completely different than natural species and or the preservation of endangered species, because the preservation of endangered species calls for an absolute absence of selection, of completely randomized breeding to rescue a species. And to apply that to breeds is not the same factor that has created breeds and will actually destroy breeds if we use those same parameters. But this loss of genetic diversity due to selection is not detrimental to the population if it's directly related to increasing its superiority. breed-defining genes would be expected to become homozygous due to selection over time. Again, if you keep selecting for the same thing, the genes that cause them are going to end up pairing up and becoming homozygous. These include the breed-selected traits for size, coat color, texture, behavior, skeletal morphology, and other traits. And I do understand your breed has 3 different size variations in terms of the toy, the miniature, and the standard, and that those are all coming from the same gene pool. So we would expect those genes to be heterozygous across your population. If there are people that are only breeding toys, we would expect those genes for size that are controlling the size in their dogs to become homozygous, and eventually you're breeding toys and only producing toys, and those that are mixing and matching are going to get dogs of different sizes within their litters. Even without close line breeding, selection for positive traits will increase their homozygosity, having originated from distant ancestors. So even if you're not purposefully line breeding, if you are selecting for the similar things, you are going to get homozygosity due to your selection. And so it's the selection that is causing the homozygosity. So that's my next slide. Selection equals homozygosity. If you're doing any selection at all, and it's uniform selection over generations, then you will develop homozygosity. It is the absolute response to selection for purposely bred individuals in domestic animals and breeds. So modern breed population statistics. This is a summary slide and a summary slide for a lot of other things that I would go into in a longer seminar. We find high, deep pedigree average inbreeding coefficients, or homozygosity. We find a low effective population size, or a limited number of founders. And these are all aspects that can be computed and that molecular geneticists are saying are the reasons that dog breeds are going to become extinct, because they're comparing those numbers to endangered species where the population dynamics are completely different. And we will find high average relationship coefficients to influential ancestors. And I'm not doing influential ancestor analysis tonight, but every breed is going to have ancestors that appear in the pedigrees of every member of the breed with genetic contributions of 15 to 35%, usually within the breed. So we would be able to find individuals usually from the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. It really depends on the age of your breed, and not necessarily founders of your breed. Sometimes they are the founders, but individuals that really epitomize the breed, whose ancestors passed on those positive characteristics and continually produced desirable characteristics that were then used for breeding in future generations and maintained the influence of those original ancestors. These are necessary and expected consequences of breed formation and evolution. This is not an Old English, American Eskimo dog. This is a Gordon Setter. This is my dog Smith. He was our first master hunter, so I kind of wanted to put his picture in there and brag about him a little bit. That is a live bird that's in his mouth, and that's what our dogs were bred for, upland game hunting. But at any rate, these are necessary and expected consequences of breed formation and evolution. And this is what people will say, oh, the unintended consequence of purebred breeding is to create homozygosity, and it's bad. And we must try to reverse that trend because it's a disastrous trend. And that simply is not true. That is actually purposeful, that we are doing selection to create homozygosity for positive traits and to eliminate negative traits that are not good, either towards our standard, which is hopefully a positive standard for health, and the positive aspects of our breed and for health. So in response to perceived concerns with genetic diversity, some advocate for homozygosity testing and species survival plan type outbreeding programs that were designed for endangered species. And these recommendations are to only breed to those dogs that are the least related to your dog. So the best mating for your dog is to breed it to the dog that is the least related to your dog. You don't have to go to dog shows anymore. You don't have to look at dogs. You don't have to do anything else except breed to the least related. And there are actually programs that will select for you the least related dog that you can breed to, and suggest that that is the dog that should be used for breeding. Actually, the Kennel Club in the UK has a mate select calculator that will tell you the dog, a mate for your dog that is the least related, and suggest that as a mating for your dog. But that type of breeding erases the genetic differences between individuals in the breed. So if we say you need to breed your dog to the least related one, then those two lines are related in the offspring. And so then if you want to breed to the least related, you have to find a dog that's not related to either of those two lines and breed it, and then all three of those lines are related. And then the next generation, you got to find someone that's not related to any of those three lines and find a fourth line that's unrelated, if it even exists anymore, and then breed to it. And so what you're doing is you're homogenizing your breed, you're creating heterozygosity, and you're losing the differences between your dogs. And the most important thing that selection, we need with selection, is differences between dogs. So I can improve the things that I need to improve in my dog, and that and we can maintain the type and the aspects of our dogs that we are selecting for. So there are several companies that now offer these types of mating systems to try to create heterozygosity and decrease your inbreeding coefficients. And they will rate your breeds based on their inbreeding coefficient. And all that inbreeding coefficient, the average inbreeding coefficient for a breed, tells you is the genetic history of a breed. It has nothing to do with the health of the breed. There are very healthy breeds that have high average inbreeding coefficients, and there are breeds that have tremendous breed-wide genetic disease that have relatively low average inbreeding coefficients. So it's got nothing to do with the health. The health of your breed has to do with what genes have been accumulated and passed on over the generations, whether due to selection for those genes, whether linked to selection to other traits that you are selecting for, where genes lie close on those chromosomes to those selected genes and have been brought with your breed, or just to random multiplication of genes in the background. So Wisdom Health has their optimal selection. Embark uses their genetic diversity panel and will give you numbers. And Dr. Peterson's lab at the UC Davis Veterinary Genetics Laboratory will also calculate inbreeding coefficients, and they have genetic diversity programs that they want your breed to sign up for, and as well as Embark wants your breed to sign up for and pay them money to run a program for your breed based on these inbreeding coefficients. And what I'll tell you is that these are commercial companies. They need to make money. They need to generate income. They have tried to sell you on a panel of over 200 tests for genetic diseases, none of which, or hardly any of them, maybe one or two of which might be applicable to your dog or your breed. The majority of those have to do with individual breeds and rare genes. So they'll pretty much never come up positive for most dogs. And they found that they can't sell you that. The public is not willing to pay for that. But they have figured out that the public is willing to pay for a genetic diversity panel. And so they've jumped on this bandwagon that says, we can help your breed control its genetic diversity in this way. But none of the types of mating systems, inbreeding, line breeding, or outbreeding, which is what these companies are telling you to do, just outbreed, none of these change the frequency of defective genes in your breed's gene pool or their dissemination. It is the selection of the individual dogs that you are used for breeding that's going to change the frequencies of genes in the background of your breed. Outbreeding will not change the frequency of deleterious genes. If you have a breed-wide genetic disease or a breed-related genetic disease, the genes controlling them have been dispersed in your breed. So whether you line breed or outbreed, the chance of selecting individuals that have those genes in their background is going to be the same. And it's not going to reduce the frequency of affected dogs. It will reduce the probability or predictability of those diseases in that way. But affected individuals will be produced in a random fashion. And if you want to know what that looks like, look at our cat populations here in America, because 95% of all cats in America are random bred cats or domestic short hairs, domestic long-haired cats. But the genetic diseases we see every day in practice occur across the board on these random bred cats, whether they are inflammatory bladder disease or diabetes mellitus or any of the other common diseases, genetic diseases that we see in cats. They're just occurring randomly. And that's what outbreeding will do for your breed. It will not change the frequencies. It will only change how and when they occur. So all breeds are inbred with many different parameters causing changes in their homozygosity and their genetic diversity. But none of the manipulations recommended by the molecular geneticists have to do with the health of your breed or selection for or against specific health or diseases or liability genes. Selection for heterozygosity selects against the good homozygosity that has been accomplished through generations of selection. So as I said, selection equals homozygosity. And if you are specifically measuring homozygosity and selecting against it, you are selecting against all the generations of selection that have created your breed. It will blindly increase minor frequency genes and chromosomal segments. So by them saying you need heterozygosity, they're going to look for gene pieces of chromosomes that are low frequency in your breed and tell you you need to breed to those individuals that have those low frequency segments of chromosomes to increase their frequency. That's what that Mars selection, I forget what it's called, but what their program is about is increasing minor chromosomal frequencies. But these are likely minor due to selection over generations against undesirable and deleterious traits. We don't have genetic tests for the vast majority of traits and diseases that we wish to select for or against. But we have been selected, and we've been very good at selecting for positive things and against negative things. And if you're blindly going to increase those genes and those pieces of chromosomes that are at minor frequency, you are likely undoing generations of selection that have been purposeful selection by your breeders to maintain the health and the quality of your breed. So genetic diversity is breeder diversity. That is my mantra. It is the varied opinion of breeders as to what constitutes the ideal animal and their selection of breeding stock that maintains breed diversity. Healthy breed gene pools require expanding or large stable populations. You need a large enough population to allow you to have a lot of individuals to select in your matings. It allows the creation of new family lines so that individual breeders that have lines that are different from your lines, so that you can look at them and say, do I want some of that? Do I not want some of that? It allows for within breed diversity. Population contraction causes loss of breed diversity and quality breed lines. So we went through some contractions due to economic circumstances here in America and around the world, where registrations went down and breeding went down because we were in a recession. And now those numbers are coming back up again. And what we are finding, and hopefully what we continue to see within the breeds, is that people didn't abandon their lines. They just kind of took a hold and a break on breeding and then continued breeding. Because if we lose lines of dogs and unique backgrounds of dogs, then that is what loses genetic diversity. Selection of breeding animals should represent the quality traits and breadth of pedigree background. So we want to utilize dogs from across the spectrum of the American Eskimo dog gene pool, and the quality lines should not be abandoned. So the popular sire syndrome is something I always like to talk about. Here's a picture of it. Obviously, this guy's a popular sire. Look at the way he's dressed. So the popular sire syndrome is the #1 cause of loss of genetic diversity within breeds. This is a geneticist's pedigree. Squares are males, circles are females. Horizontal lines are matings and vertical lines are offspring. And so if we consider this schematic here a diverse breed, and certainly it's not a diverse breed just based on the number of dogs, but we're using this as an example. And then one day a dog comes along and everyone oohs and ahs and says, oh my God, what a magnificent specimen. You know, I want to breed to that dog. He's you know, everyone loves him. So bitches from across the spectrum of the gene pool and the fancy are being bred to him very rapidly, and his genes are being spread far and wide. People like what they see. They start to line breed on him, and very quickly his genes become dispersed across the gene pool. That is the popular sire syndrome, a very rapid dissemination of an individual dog's genes across the gene pool. And in many breeds, we see multi-generational popular sire syndromes, where a popular sire is then replaced by his son as a popular sire, who is then replaced by his son as a popular sire, and the entire breed truncates on a single breed line within the breed. And this happens not just in small population breeds. We see this happening in very populous breeds as well, that a single male line becomes dominant in the dog shows and in breeding over multiple generations. It is the most significant factor in restricting gene pool diversity. The overuse of a popular sire quickly disseminates his genes throughout the gene pool without the benefit of evaluation over time. And that's what the important factor is, without the benefit of evaluation over time. We like him, but we really don't know everything he's passing on. We don't know the recessives in his background. We talk about influential ancestors that have very high percentages of influence within a breed. And some people would say, well, what's the difference with a popular sire who got that influence very quickly? Well, those influential ancestors are influential because their descendants continually passed on quality generation after generation, and that's why they maintained their influence, whereas a popular sire does not have that benefit of evaluation. But the most insidious thing about the popular sire syndrome is that it causes the loss of other quality male lines that should be contributing to the gene pool. That there are only so many quality bitches that are being bred with each generation. And if an inordinate amount of them are being bred to a single male or a single male line, we are sidelining the other sire lines and the other lines in our gene pools. And if we find that a popular sire has passed on deleterious traits that we then want to get rid of, and we look to purge that individual from our lines, we are then purging an entire generation of the best bitches that all were bred to him over an entire generation. So we are really doing a disservice to our gene pool in that regard. So moderation in terms of sire use is really an important aspect, and certainly free semen, but don't be breeding, unnecessarily to a single sire line and replacing the other quality lines that should be maintained in your gene pool. If you see a popular sire, don't say, I need a piece of that popular sire. What you need to say is, well, let's see what he produces, and maybe I'll breed to an offspring or grand offspring from lines that I also desire to bring into mine and know more readily what is being carried and passed on in those individuals. So next, I want to talk about diseases and disorders, or what I call, pay attention, the dark side of breed development. So all individuals carry some deleterious mutations. Quality individuals who propagate will also propagate their deleterious mutations, whatever they're carrying. And these can cause breed-related disease if they are disseminated and increase in frequency throughout the founder's effect. And so it would happen quickly with a popular sire syndrome. It could happen slowly with even with an influential ancestor. And so these are things that we need to pay attention to, and everyone has some deleterious genes. Breed propagation must always include active monitoring, meaning genetic screening and genetic testing. and selection against genetic disease. So monitoring and selection are the two most important things you're going to be doing as breeders. And without this selection, the genetic health of the breed will decline. So if you're not doing genetic screening, then the genetic health of your breed will decline. It's not that things will stay the same, because health is not a given. It's not an absolute. It's something you actively have to select for with every mating and every generation, or you're going to lose health. And that is a big message of our talk today. When breeds have issues with genetic disease, the only way to improve their gene pool is through genetic screening and selection against the specific diseases and their associated liability genes. So saying we're going to make your, that a genetic testing company is going to make your breed healthier by using their genetic diversity panel, and you're going to produce the healthiest dogs or the largest litters, which they have not proven. None of those claims have ever been shown to be scientifically valid, and they have the data to show it. And they say, well, we just haven't gotten around to publishing it. Well, if you haven't published it, it doesn't exist. But none of those things are occurring based on what they are claiming. You don't get health unless you select for health. There's no quick fix or number that if you select for, that's going to make your dogs healthy. It's just not the way that it works. It takes work. It takes monitoring, but through screening and selection for health, specifically for and against the traits that you want and the diseases that you don't want. Pre-breeding health screening should become as universal as equine pre-purchase exams. This is another one of my mantras. If you're a horse person, you know that you don't buy a horse unless you have a veterinarian do a pre-purchase exam and check that horse out and make sure that you can actually use it for the purpose that you're purchasing it for. Does it have laminitis? Does it have navicular disease? Does it have any number of things that are going to prevent you from riding that horse or utilizing that horse? And if you don't do that, then people in the horse world will say, well, you're just dumb that you bought a horse without even having it examined, because that is the standard. Pre-breeding health screening before you breed an animal and looking for pre-breeding health screening before you purchase a puppy should become the norm, just as it is for equine pre-purchase exams. So that is one of my hopes, that we can educate the public about pre-breeding health screening. So breed maintenance requires avoiding the popular sire syndrome, utilizing quality dogs from the breadth of your population to expand the gene pool, monitoring genetic health through regular health surveys, doing genetic screening for breed-related disorders, participating in open health registries to manage genetic disorders, and we'll go through that, and then constant selection for both quality and for health. So now let's talk a little bit about, so that's about gene pools and diversity. And now let's talk specifically about health and genetic diseases. So what are the breeding goals of breeding? It's to maintain and enhance the quality of the breed. And some of you might be surprised and say, well, it's to produce a healthy breed. My dog's barking. But in actuality, it's to enhance the quality of the breed. I mean, there are plenty of healthy mixed breed dogs that are out there. So if you just want health, you can get a healthy purebred dog, you can get a healthy mixed breed dog, you can get a sick mixed breed dog, genetically. There's, we see as much genetic disease in mixed breed dogs as we see in purebred dogs, with the most common diseases that we see as a practitioner. Every veterinarian sees mixed breed dogs with genetic disease every day, because the number one genetic disease that we treat is allergies. And we see just as much allergies in mixed breed as well as purebred dogs, as well as all of the other things. All of the mixed breed dogs that are on non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, Rimadyl and Carprofen, and all these other drugs for their arthritis when they're older. Why do you think they have arthritis? Because they have hip dysplasia. Well, they're not purebred dogs. Why do they have hip dysplasia? Because all dogs can develop hip dysplasia. These are the common things that we see across all breeds. So we want to enhance the quality of the breed. That's why you are breeding Eskies. That's why you are an Eskie enthusiast. And you don't want to limit the genetic diversity of the population. So you don't want to do the popular sire syndrome. You want to utilize the breadth of your gene pool. You want to select for healthy dogs. And genetic disease control is an equal aspect of your breeding. You don't want to, and what is the goal with each mating is to not produce affected dogs in your next litter. Okay, that's what you want to do. You don't want to sell a dog that's going to develop a genetic disease to an owner where that dog is going to become a member of their family. And then secondarily, we want to decrease the frequency of carriers of defective genes if they are measurable or even if they're not measurable. We don't want to pass on a lot of carriers to the population, because then we're going to end up producing more affecteds in the future. So we do want to restrict carriers if we can test for them, or by selecting against traits and ranking those traits based on the appearance of them in the close relatives. So we'll talk about those aspects of breeding. So genetic screening and genetic testing. This dog is not doing genetic screening. We know what it's doing. Okay. So next poll question. What genetic screening do you do in your dogs? Eyes, hips, and DD. PRA and degenerative myelopathy. PRA, degenerative myelopathy, hip dysplasia, eyes, and that's the there's the OFA eye exams. PRA, degenerative myelopathy, hips, elbows, but not everyone does. It isn't required. Okay, and we'll go through all those things. PRA, thyroid, eyes, hips, and elbows. Degenerative myelopathy, PRA, eye exam, hips, and patellas. PRA, hips, and elbows. OFA, hips, Leg-Perthes disease, eyes, dentition, patella, PRA, and cardiac, hips, eyes, patellas, elbows, basic cardiac, PRA, degenerative myelopathy, PRA and degenerative myelopathy. In the chat, someone put hips, PRA, and eyes, hips, PRA, degenerative myelopathy, cardiac advanced, degenerative myelopathy, PRA, lens luxation, eyes, hips, and patellas. Okay, so you're all hitting pretty similar things here, some of them more limited, some of them more expansive. Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay, so the OFA online health survey, and I'll show you that when I go onto the OFA website. That survey was active through 2019. And then it was taken down by your club and analyzed. I think it was a mistake to shut it down. I think it's good to analyze it periodically, but I do think that all breeds should have an active online health survey on the OFA website. It doesn't cost you anything. You can make it customized to your breed, which you did, and I will make some recommendations as to other things to customize it to before you reinstate it. But I think that all breeds should always have a health survey, because you always need to know what is happening in your breed, what is going on, and without a health survey, you really don't know that. But on your health survey, you answered that 23.5% of you do the genetic test for PRA, that 23.3% do an eye examination, 22.2% do OFA hip evaluations, 15.3% do patellas, 6.8% elbows, 4.7% thyroid, 4.1% other hips, usually pen hip, and 3.5% of you do degenerative myelopathy. Barbara Bainan is your health chair, and on your website I see a lot of work that she's done and articles that she's written. She did analyze that health survey and did a really good job of it. If you want to read her right up there, and I've also analyzed it in a similar fashion. We'll go over that with you tonight. But you should reinstate that health survey. It's at no charge. The OFA will work with you to help customize it and answer your current questions to make sure that they're on there so you can survey your breed and your breeders. And I would advertise it through your breed publications so that your owners, as well as your non-member owners, could answer about their dogs. Okay, so there are tests of the genotype, direct DNA tests for liability genes. There are tests of the phenotype, which primarily identify clinically affected individuals. So that would be a hip radiograph, that would be an eye examination. Your test of the genotype would be like a PRA test or a DM test, although there are caveats to many of those tests as to what they're actually measuring and telling you. There's pedigree analysis, or the identification of carrier risk based on the knowledge of carrier and affected relatives. So just knowing about the family of your dog and what genetic diseases have been seen or passed on by close relatives to tell you about the risk of your dog carrying liability genes. So the next question, what genetic disorder are you seeing in your dogs? And again, this is an anonymous poll, so no one knows who's putting in what answers. So I'm asking you to be honest about it. What genetic disorders are you clinically seeing in your dogs? So I'm not saying is my dog tested homozygous for the degenerative myelopathy gene. I'm saying, has your dog become paralyzed with degenerative myelopathy? Has your dog become blind with PRA? Has your dog been diagnosed with hip dysplasia, clinically diagnosed based on an X-ray? What genetic disorders are your dogs affected with? Okay, heritable thyroid, so hypothyroidism. Loss of pigmentation, cancer. I'm not addressing in another part loss of pigmentation, so I'll just mention that we do see in pigmented breeds, and especially in pigmented breeds that have white coloration or large areas of white coloration, piebald and so forth breeds, that we see instances of loss of pigmentation from black to pink on the nose, on the lips, around the eyes, and not much has been done on the heredity of that, of how that's inherited, but certainly there has to be some hereditary implication to it. Hip dysplasia, seizures, thyroid dysfunction. To my knowledge, none of my dogs are affected with the major diseases. Good luck to you, and someday you won't be able to say that anymore, especially if you do more screening. Nothing, although I see rim lack of pigmentation. We all want to feel that our dogs are perfect, and once we get beyond that and recognize that all dogs have something, and nobody's absolutely perfect, then we can then be on a level playing field and breed to what we want to breed to, and look at everyone else's dogs to say, what do I need that I don't have? What would I like to share, and what can I bring into my lines? PRA in first two Eskies later in life. Dogs are born in 2002, one tested carrier, the other not tested. Okay, we'll talk about the heterogeneity of PRA in the breed. There's more than one PRA than just the one we're testing for. A stud acquired for breeding, tested affected for DM. They did not test affected, they tested at risk, and we'll talk about that. Juvenile cataracts and cancer. And the question once again is, were those juvenile cataracts complete cataracts that blocked their vision so they became blind with cataracts? Or were they just something that was seen by an ophthalmologist, but that you didn't even see them or know that they were there, nor will you the rest of that dog's life, because they're only a punctate or a very discrete area of pacification of the lens that they can call a cataract. Cancer at risk for DM, but they're not affected. They're not clinically affected with degenerative myelopathy, is something that you need to recognize with those genetic tests. Okay, so let's talk about specific diseases, DM carriers and one at risk. Again, your dogs aren't affected and in all likelihood will never be affected with DM. And we're going to talk about that. Okay, so the Canine Health Foundation of the AKC is the health arm of the AKC, and they ask every breed club on a annual to semi-annual basis, what are the most important genetic diseases that are seen in your breed, or what are the most important diseases that your breed club is concerned with? And they ask that for a purpose. They ask that because they are funding millions and millions of dollars of health research into dogs, both genetic disease as well as infectious disease, tick-borne diseases, and metabolic disease, and so forth. And so they want to know what is affecting or of concern to the most number of people and breeds, and therefore what's going to have the most impact across all breeds. And so what they do is they then can compile a list for us of the most frequent concerns of the breeds across all breeds. So here is the latest list that came out. Number one is hip dysplasia. Number one, a long time ago, used to be PRA. But PRA, we have found so many testable genes for PRA and the most frequent forms of PRA that across all breeds that it has now become very low on the list as a concern because for most breeds they can test for it. But number one is hip dysplasia. Number two is epilepsy. Number three is allergies. Number four is hemangiosarcoma as the first of the malignant inherited diseases that we see in dogs. Hypothyroidism. Number six is lymphoma as the second of the most common malignancy cancers that we see in dogs. Number seven is gastric dilatation of volvulus or bloat, which you pretty much don't see in your breed because that's mostly a large and giant breed condition, although any individual dog sporadically can get that if they have certain conditions. Patelloluxation or slipping kneecaps, which we see mostly in toy breeds and some in the miniatures as well. So I expect that to be more frequent in toy Eskies than in miniatures and less likely in the standards. Torn cruciate ligaments, especially in very active breeds such as yours. Inflammatory, but usually more in larger size breeds. Inflammatory bowel disease. And then the next 10, cataracts, osteosarcoma as the next of the malignant cancers, atopic or inhalant dermatitis as a form of allergies, the most common form of allergies that we see in dogs, elbow dysplasia, immune-mediated hemolytic anemia, where the body destroys its own red blood cells, cardiomyopathies, which is a group of diseases, of breed-related diseases that causes heart muscle disease and enlarged hearts, progressive retinal atrophy, which is also a collection of many, many different genes that can cause degeneration of the retina and blindness, mammary tumors in females, retained testicles in males, and mitral valvular disease is a specific type of heart disease, especially in toy and miniature size breeds for that. So those are the most common health concerns across all breeds. We have a question, does sunlight affect pigmentation? I don't have an answer to that. So does it affect loss of pigmentation, I think is what you're asking about as well. And I don't know that anyone knows an answer to that. I don't know that anyone has actually looked at that as a specific disease process. I will tell you that impetigo, which is a immune-mediated loss of pigmentation in man as well as in dogs, is a disease that we see in higher frequency in some breeds than in others. But I don't believe that the pigment loss that you're seeing in your dogs is that disease process. It is something else entirely, and it is not something that has been or is being researched at this point in time. Unfortunately, a lot of diseases that are going to get big funding research dollars are going to be diseases that have human corollaries, where they can tap into the human market and get some One Health medicine money to research these things. For something that is a cosmetic but not health-related concern, you're going to have to come up with all the money yourselves, or you and other breeds that have that issue to fund research that's going to cost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to find some answers for, or hopefully the cost of research continues to go down as our techniques get better. But as of right now, I don't see in the close horizon more progress on loss of pigmentation as a disease research project. Okay. So going back to the OFA Online Health Survey, it surveys disorders by body system, and it categorizes them by body system. Cancer is 17% on your list, but unfortunately, and this is something that I'll point out to you when we go through the survey, when we look at it online, you're not differentiating benign cancers from malignant cancers. So, and you don't even have it as have lipomas as something to select for on your survey. You have cancer other. You don't have sebaceous adenomas. These are the two most common cancers, and they're benign cancers that we see in dogs in general. And if we eliminate those, then probably your frequency of cancer is going to be somewhere down here, because I don't consider your breed a cancer breed, or that cancer is your #1 issue in your breed. Ocular is high. Dental and missing teeth is a big thing for you guys. Aggression or temperament is certainly a significant issue for your breed that you need to deal with as a breed. Musculoskeletal disease, allergies, GI, vomiting, diarrhea, and inflammatory bowel disease, and so forth. Endocrine disease, which is hypothyroidism and Cushing's disease and Addison's disease, and so forth. Skin disease, neuromuscular disease, kidneys, heart, liver, reproductive issues, breathing problems, immune-mediated disease, ear diseases, and blood or lymph diseases in that regard. So, so these are the disorders by body system. This is the results that I've compiled and computed for you for the 878 dogs that were entered into the OFA Health Survey and its dogs through 2019 when that survey was shut down. And these are not the numbers that you'll find online, because the numbers you'll find online group the disorders as what is the frequency of cancer disorders, and then what is the frequency of this cancer within that group. So you've got, a certain percentage of your breed has a cancer disorder, and then a third of them have this type of cancer, or have that type of cancer, but not what is the percentage of my breed that has this disease. The other thing you need to understand about health surveys is that these percentages are not correct in terms of saying that is the actual frequency of disease in your breed. No health survey is absolute in terms of not being skewed for certain aspects, so that it's not really reflecting the actual numbers. And in your survey, we do know what the frequency of certain disorders are, so we can compare these numbers to those that are being measured. And so we can say that these percentages are underreporting the actual frequencies of these things here on this list for your breed. But what a breed health survey absolutely does for us is that it prioritizes and ranks those different disorders that are occurring in your breed versus those that are much less frequent and not occurring as much in your breed. So the ones at the higher end of the list are the problems that you're seeing as breed-specific problems, and the ones that are very low on the list or not on the list are problems that you're not seeing within your breed, and we absolutely can say that. So by percentage, the #1 issue for health in your breed is aggression to people at 5.6%. And that has to do with what your breed was bred for. Your breed was created as an alarm barker, as a hyper vigilant, and I think that's a really good word for your breed. And we use this for a couple of different breeds. Belgian Taverns are also hyper vigilant and have some significant temperament issues that the breeders have to deal with, because you've taken a hyper vigilant dog that is supposed to be alert to every single thing going on around them and very quick to respond and to alert to any changes in its environment as a watcher and as a protector of home and family. And you're asking it to become a lovable little house dog. And so certainly that can be done, but that's not what your breed was bred for. And so you are selecting against the what has been selected for generations to create your breed in order to have a stable and lovable little house dog, to have in your home. And if that's what you're looking for, as most of you know, this probably isn't the breed for you. You like that your breed is bold and that it has the personality that it has, but it can overdo it, and we do need to watch that. And there are dogs in your breed with pathological temperaments that cannot control their aggression and that cannot control their responsiveness to things that they should not be aggressing towards, children and other people and other people's dogs and so forth, that you really need to watch out for and to deal with. So this is the number one issue, aggressive to people, that you have listed on your health survey, that you as Esky people have listed as the number one problem in your breed. Senile cataracts at number 2, 5.4, but it does not list the age of dogs that have these cataracts. And we'll look at the OFA eye examinations to try to come up with those numbers to figure that out for us. But that is number 2 on your list. And if they're all occurring in dogs that are 10 and 12 and 14 years of age, then kind of who cares, because you expect old dogs to get some cataracts. But that is the number 2 on the list. Arthritis at 3.4 in general. It's not listing a specific type of arthritis. Inhalant allergies at 3.2. That is the most common type of allergy we see across all dog breeds. Diabetes mellitus at 2.9. This is definitely a breed-related issue in your breed, an inherited genetic disease, and it has been studied and will continue to be studied to hopefully get some progress in figuring out how that's inherited and maybe even getting you some genetic liability tests for it. Progressive retinal atrophy at 2.6%. And again, just like when you answered the question when I asked you what clinical diseases do you guys have, you are answering with the results of your carrier tests where your dogs weren't clinically affected. So it's hard to say whether people are answering because their dogs tested as carrier, or whether people are answering because their dogs actually tested as blind, that were actually showing blindness, which is what you want a health survey to reflect. Food allergy is high on the list, and I'll tell you that when an owner fills out a health survey, food allergy is going to be overrepresented, because most people who have allergic dogs, the number one thing they think about is food allergy. And I see it, we as veterinarians see it in our practices all the time, that the owners think that the dogs have food allergy, when food allergy is actually one of the lowest frequency allergies that we see in dogs. There are components of food that can be helpful for reducing allergic symptoms, omega fatty acids and fish oils and those types of things. But allergies to specific proteins in their food is actually a low frequency allergy, and far, far lower, a small percentage compared to inhalant allergies. Storm phobia, dog aggressive, noise phobia, separation anxiety. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, 4 behavioral issues or temperament issues that are listed high on your list. So again, indicating that temperament is an issue that you're dealing with in your Eskies, and something that you guys need to pay attention to and not ignore when you're making your breeding decisions. I have a dog in my house that I love dearly. And he's 8 years old. He's a magnificent looking dog, but he is a fearful dog, and he's not fearful aggressive. He backs up. We've never shown him, because he'll back up to a judge and get excused, and we're not going to do that. But he is shy. He's a shy dog, and we don't want to pass that on in our breed. So he has never and will never be bred. But we love him. I love him. He's a great, great dog. And I hope to breed better than that to use in our breeding program, because shyness is, this behavior is definitely inherited. So you need to pay attention to behaviors and not excuse it and say, oh, something bad happened to it when it was a puppy. But I'll just use it for breeding in that regard. Okay, heart murmur. So you've got heart murmur as a symptom, but then you look all the way down, but heart failure is less than half that percentage. So you're getting a heart murmur, but you're not getting as much heart failure, congestive heart failure. I'm not seeing mitral valvular disease for a smaller stature type of dog. Now, again, the average age of your health survey and the average age of dogs being answered in health survey is probably lower than many dogs that are going to develop those things. But certainly you've got senile cataracts up here as a high percentage. So it's not like there aren't old dogs in your survey. So a heart murmur by itself is not necessarily predictive of disease later on, but it's certainly something to note. And a cardiologist can tell you what valve is causing that murmur, and therefore what kinds of diseases could be in the background there. Contact allergy, I'm not sure that's a high frequency issue in terms of allergies. Again, inhalant is the vast majority of allergies. Epilepsy or inherited seizures. Hip dysplasia. So you've got epilepsy and hip dysplasia fairly equal there on your list, which tells me that epilepsy is a bit of a problem in your breed, because hip dysplasia is certainly present in all breeds and at a fairly decent frequency. So that's telling me that you may have an epilepsy issue, and some of you have listed that and said, I've got epileptic dogs. Hypothyroidism. And I'll tell you that a lot of people say their dogs are hypothyroid because they're being treated with thyroid or because they have thyroid responsive disease. There are a lot of thyroid responsive traits, not necessarily even diseases, that dogs will respond to with thyroid supplementation, but it does not mean that they have inherited thyroid disease. So I'll go over that with you when we talk about these diseases. Dog aggressive within the household, where your own dogs are attacking each other as an instance of aggression. Retained testicles, and this is 1.9% of just the males. I did not include the females in this ratio here. Lymphosarcoma as your number one inherited cancer in your breed, but it's on the second half of your list. It's not like you have a highly cancer-prone breed. Inflammatory bowel disease, shyness, missing teeth, usually missing premolars in breeds, flea allergy, heart failure, luxating kneecaps. So we tend to see that more, as I said, in the toys and miniatures than in the standards. Cushing's disease, which is an overreactive adrenal gland, a reserved temperament, bilateral deafness. Again, I would want to ask, what is the age of the dogs? And your health chair can query the OFA on any of these OFA health survey results and say, can you take the dogs who were checked off for bilateral deafness and tell me the average age of those dogs from the health survey? All the data is there. We are a data company. We collect data. We have over 20 million data points on dogs and can analyze that in any way for, and we're there. Our mission as a not-for-profit is to assist with improving the genetic health of breeds. So in order to improve it, you need to know, what are your issues? Do you have young age deafness, or do you have old age deafness in old dogs, which who cares about, because some old dogs can get deaf. Juvenile cataracts, that's certainly something to be concerned with, but a lot of juvenile cataracts, if they're only punctate or incipient and never develop any further, are not really cause for concern for a breed. The Golden Retriever breed has a high frequency of cataracts in the breed, but they're all punctate Y-suture cataracts that never develop beyond that little bit of opacity in the back of the lens, do not affect vision, and never affect the dogs in any other way. So is it something that you want to select against? Sure. But is it the most important thing to select against, or does it actually impact the dog's life? No, it does not. So even though it's a high frequency disorder, it has very little impact on them, and they have other issues that to deal with rather than that. Mast cell tumors as the second most frequent malignant cancer in your breed. hemangiosarcoma as your third most frequent. Torn cruciate ligament is an inherited disease. We know that from the study of many other breeds. Mammary cancer, and I've only divided that by the females in the health survey. And when you do health surveys with breed clubs, we tend to see higher incidence of mammary cancer, mainly because you leave your bitches intact a lot longer. That's different in Europe, where they don't have a environment of spay-neuter, significantly reduces the incidence of mammary cancer. But if we leave our dogs intact, we see that being expressed. And then colitis is the last one that came in at 1% or above from your health survey. So those are the diseases that we see. And I see I'm running late here, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. But that's what we're seeing here. So let's talk about some very specific issues. I do see here that someone asked, can over-vaccination cause liver and kidney issues? And I don't have an answer for you for that. You need to talk to immunologists and those individuals that study those specific liver and kidney diseases. But if they're not inflammatory type of diseases causing them, then vaccination is not going to affect them, because vaccination affects things through immune-mediated means. And if it's not an autoimmune or immune-mediated disease, it's not necessarily going to affect that. That said, diabetes mellitus is an immune-mediated disease, but studies have not shown that vaccination has anything to do with it. It is absolutely an inherited disease that we see in specific breeds. We see it in Eskies. We see it in Samoyeds. So if you're funding research, and as you have, and has been done, studying Samoyeds and Eskies together is probably a good idea, because they probably share some common genes related to their diabetes mellitus, as they do with many genes in their ancestral background. But Australian Terriers also have diabetes mellitus. Norwegian elk hounds also have issues with diabetes mellitus. So there are many breeds that have that much higher frequency as breed related diseases. Is cryptorchidism underreported? Who knows? But it's retained testicles. It's not the absence of testicles, or monorchidism, as some people call it. It is retained testicles. And the one thing that I'll tell you about retained testicles, if you're having issues with that, is that dogs with late descending testicles, if you're seeing that as a trend in some of your dogs, that is a reflection that you are accumulating liability genes for retained testicles. Testicles should be in the scrotum by 8 weeks of age, by 5 to 8 weeks of age. And if they drop by 12 weeks, or if they drop by 16 weeks, then we're all happy about them, but those are late descending testicles. And if you're having issues with retained testicles, you need to pay attention to the late descending testicles as well, because those dogs are expressing that they have liability genes for those. And retained testicles is a sex-limited disease, so that the females carry just as many genes for it as the males do, except they don't express the disease because they don't have testicles. And the way that I compare it is I compare that to milk production in cattle. Okay, males and females all pass on the same milk production genes, but males don't produce milk, so they don't express those genes. So bulls are measured by the production of their daughters to measure and evaluate their milk producing genes. But what the message is, that you need to pay attention to the females related to males that have retained testicles, and from females with retained and delayed descending testicles, in order to actually select against this disease. If you ignore your females, and you're having that issue, you're not going to get rid of it. Okay, let's move on. So canine hip dysplasia. And this is a little dog. It's not just a big dog disease. We see it in little dogs all the time. We may not see as much pain and morbidity from it, because they don't have the weight stress as much as a big, heavy 80-pound dog. But we certainly see plenty of lame little dogs with hip dysplasia, and plenty of hip dysplasia in small statured breeds. So you rank 125th out of 208 based on 1,371 radiographs that have been submitted to OFA. 89.1% are normal, certain and 10.1% dysplastic. Certain ways that we, and the small percentage there that's missing are dogs that tested borderline, which is a in-between rating that we tell you take another radiograph six months or more later for evaluation. One way that we measure breeds on hip dysplasia is the percentage of excellence, and you've got 10.4% excellence, and the average for all breeds is 15.7. So you have less excellence than the average across all breeds, and so that's not a good thing. You want more dogs with excellent hip conformation. You've got more fairs than you have excellence, which a lot of breeds do, but you're almost a 2-to-1. Fair versus excellent. So that tells me we need better hip conformation that you need to select for. The vast majority are goods, which is what we see in most breeds. You're seeing 10.1% dysplastic, and the average for all breeds is 11.4. So it's not that you have a lot more dysplasia than others, but your total hip conformation is not as good as we would want to see compared to other breeds. And there's more mild than moderate than severe, which is what we tend to see across all breeds in terms of the severity of dysplasia in your dogs. When we look at the hip trends, this is the compilation of all of the radiographs taken over the course of the OFA database. And so when we break that up into 5-year periods with the number of dogs that have been tested, we see that your excellence have gone up pretty much consistently, which is good. They went down a little bit here, but then back up, since 2021. And your dysplastics have been going down, although we did see a lot more in the 16 to 20 here before it went down again over here in the 114 dogs that have been tested since 2021. So 2021 and beyond. So what this tells us is that you are improving in terms of your hip conformation, and that is an important thing. We are not seeing the numbers that we used to see, and certainly your population is smaller, but it wasn't that much smaller in this period here. It was smaller back then in the 90s, and so less of you are testing and actually getting your hips being rated, and that's an important thing that you need to be doing. Leg calf perthes disease is what's called an aseptic necrosis of the femoral head. So the blood vessel that supplies the neck of the femur, this occurs only in toy breeds, and we're breeding them so small that vessel is so tiny that it lacks the blood pressure to remain patent or open. And so that vessel closes down and no longer supplies the blood supply to this area of bone. And so you get necrosis or death of the cells there because they're not being nourished by a blood supply. Aseptic meaning it's not a infection necrosis. And then when other blood vessels come in and a fracture heals and it restores the nutrition to that area, we get all this remodeling and a big arthritic hip there. It's usually unilateral, only one-sided, although we do see bilateral disease. Its age of onset is usually under 9 months of age. It can be treated surgically if it's causing pain to the dog at any time with a femoral head and neck excision. And Dr. Paget, who was a great dog geneticist before he passed away some time ago, did some studies on this and found it was a complexly inherited disease, multiple genes involved, but there was a major autosomal recessive gene at play. And he even crossed a couple of breeds, some toy poodles with another breed that had it, and produced effectives showing that there are common genes amongst between breeds that cause this genetic disease. One dog out of 125 dogs in the OFA database is showing affected for your breed. That probably underreports it a little bit because mostly these are people sending in an x-ray that they already know is normal. So only one person with an affected dog. And it was only the first year of the OFA database that in your breed where they were recording this, that dog was reported, I think 2003. Patelloluxation or slipping kneecaps is an inherited disease. You rank 61 out of 157, so that's a much higher ranking. These rankings is where you don't want to be number one, okay? So, you're in the middle here, a little bit above the middle based on 226 evaluations. 96.9% are normal and 3.1% affected. That is underreporting. Patella evaluations, if you send them into OFA, you already, when you're sending it in, you already know the results, and people tend not to send in reports on affected dogs because they don't want to report it as affected. I'll tell you, if you report an affected individual on non-OFA screened databases, so not hips or elbows where someone has to be paid to evaluate those radiographs, but on a PRA or on a patella or a heart evaluation, if your dog is affected, you do not need to pay the $15. It is a free reporting to try to encourage you to report abnormals. Is a decision we made some time ago on the OFA. And again, like with hip dysplasia, grade 1s outnumber grade 2s and outnumber grade 3s. So it's not a frequent disease in your breed, but if you're getting a hip radiograph, it doesn't cost that much more to get the elbows done as well. And especially in your standards and even your miniatures, because elbow dysplasia is more of a larger breed disease, but we do see it in some smaller breeds as well. And it's always good to monitor and ensure that you're not seeing that creeping into your breed. I'm sorry, this is patella luxation. Patella luxation is definitely an important disease in small and toy and miniatures. So I had a brain fart there for a second. So this is something you definitely should monitor for, and I would recommend sending those into OFA. Elbow dysplasia is more of a large breed disease. You are ranked 123rd out of 153 based on 255 evaluations, the vast majority being normal for dogs with grade 1 disease. And grade 1 doesn't cause arthritis. It's something you see on the radiograph, but it's only grade 2s and grade 3s where the dogs are actually arthritic or lame with that disease. But whenever you see a grade 2 or grade 3 dog and you look at its close relatives, you see a lot of grade 1s, and that tells you that you're accumulating liability genes for this complexly inherited disease. So again, this is more of a large breed disease, but I would, if you're doing hip radiographs, I would do elbows as well because it is important to know. So for your genetic tests, PRA is an inherited blindness. You have the PRCD, or progressive rod cone degeneration form of PRA, and it starts with difficulty in dim light and night blindness. It can occur from 3 years of age, but usually more like 7, 8, 9 to 12 years of age. Affected dogs may not progress to total blindness. It's a very slowly progressive disease. Some dogs will go totally blind from it. You do have a genetic test available to you, and it is one of your check requirements. There is another form of PRA in the breed with an unidentified genetic cause. So there are dogs with progressive retinal atrophy. An ophthalmologist looks at their retinas, and there is degeneration there that they can visualize, but they are negative for the PRCD form of PRA. And so there's at least one other form in the breed, and based on what the ophthalmologists are telling us, it is a younger age of onset on those dogs in terms of their going blind. Your PRA testing based on the OFA, you have sent in 137 evaluations, 81% normal, 19% carrier, and none affected. Again, this is an instance where you're not sending in affected because you already know it says affected, and why would you send that in? You should send that in because it reports the frequency in the breed. But the bottom line with this is you have a testable gene, and most affected dogs will show, if they live old enough, will show some visual issues at night or in dim light. And so you should genetic test your dogs, and that's why it's a CHIC requirement. But that's why you're not seeing any affecteds being reported here. If we look at data from the genetic testing companies, we will see a more accurate reflection of the percentages, but for a short, which is becoming longer, seminar that I'm doing for you tonight, I did not do that query for the genetic testing companies. So diabetes mellitus is an issue in your breed. It's the number it was in the top 5, but certainly a more frequent genetic disease seen in your breed. It's an autoimmune destruction of the pancreatic beta cells that produce insulin. It causes high levels of glucose or sugar in the blood and in the urine, causes increased drinking and urination. It causes an increased appetite because they are not able to utilize sugar. Insulin transports sugar into the cells to nourish the cells of the body. And without insulin, the sugar stays in the bloodstream, gets spilled into the urine, but doesn't nourish the body. And so the dog is saying, I'm starving for energy, I need to eat more, and they will eat more. It's only when they become ketoacidotic and actually so sick from all of the high levels in their system that their appetite then goes down. But then they are in a crisis emergency situation and will die if not treated appropriately. Usually you'll catch your dogs long before that with with the drinking and the peeing and so forth. They will lose weight because they can't utilize sugar. They can develop diabetic cataracts due to persistently high sugar levels. They'll get sugar-related cataracts in their eyes. Maybe that's part of the senile cataracts that was reported in your health surveys, and someone would have to look and see whether it's the diabetic dogs that actually reported with the cataracts in that way. You would control it with insulin diet and glucose monitoring. There was a funded Canada Health Foundation research project on diabetes mellitus, and published in 2019 by several researchers, including Dr. Overbauer at UC Davis, Dr. Hess at Pennsylvania, Kai, a couple of other researchers. It was a multi-institutional study, and they found that the heritability of diabetes mellitus is 62%, which is an extremely heritable disease. So this is primarily a genetic disease. Hip dysplasia's heritability is 27%. So there's a lot of environmental component to it. It's considered moderately heritable. This is highly heritable. The mean age at the time of diagnosis in your breed is 6.3 years of age, with a standard deviation of 2.4 years. There was no difference between the numbers of males and females that were affected with diabetes in your breed. There were more spayed and neutered dogs than intact ones, but this was not a statistically significant number when they applied statistics to it. And there are much more spayed and neutered dogs in America than there are intact dogs. So that also could have skewed that data. And they found that there was a complex mode of inheritance involving multiple genes, and there was not a single gene of large effect. So unlike unlike Leg-Perthes disease, where Dr. Paget found that it was complexly inherited and there was a major autosomal recessive gene, the statistical analysis of this disease said that there was not a gene of major effect. So there are multiple genes of equal effect adding together to cross a threshold to cause this disease. Hypothyroidism is a diagnosis of autoimmune thyroiditis. So you need to measure thyroglobulin autoantibodies to call a dog affected. It's not just dogs that respond to thyroid supplementation, whether they have a poor hair coat, whether they have infertility, whether they have whether they have obesity, any number of conditions that can respond to thyroid supplementation does not mean that they have inherited hypothyroidism. You need to measure those autoantibodies. 848 American Eskimo dogs have been tested at Michigan State, which is one of the largest testing centers for this in the country. 7.8% test affected and 3.5 equivocal. 7.8 is the average for all breeds. 7.5 is the average for all breeds. So you're at about the average for all breeds with this. I'm going to move on to the rest of these diseases here. Degenerative myelopathy. All breeds of dogs and mixed breed dogs carry the liability mutation for DM. Every breed and mixed breed dog can carry this gene. So this is something that you guys need to understand when you're looking at the results of them. Sporadic cases of degenerative myelopathy can occur in any breed or mixed breed dog. So the fact that you have one or two affected dogs that have been documented in your breed, or some related dogs in your breed does not mean you have a breed-wide genetic disease. The majority of clinical cases occur in only a handful of breeds, primarily Boxers and German Shepherds, and there are about 5 or 6 other breeds where we do see familial disease, where we see that being passed through pedigrees and through families and not just sporadic individuals within a breed. While there are sporadic documented cases of degenerative myelopathy in your breed, it does not exist as a breed-associated disease. We cannot put together pedigrees of affected dogs that shows this being passed on throughout your breed. And the frequency of the variant in the breed far exceeds the frequency of dogs that develop DM. So it is a very poor predictor of disease liability. And we need to compare this to degenerative myelopathy to Lou Gehrig's disease in people, where this a mutation in this gene also causes Lou Gehrig's disease. And it is a sporadic disease. The majority of disease in man is a sporadic disease. It's not a familial disease, except in some very, very limited families like we see in the Boxers and the German Shepherds. But this is not a familial disease in your breed. Your testing for DM shows that your breed has a very high frequency of this mutation in its background, where a quarter of your breed is testing homozygous at risk. But you are not seeing a quarter of your breed becoming paralyzed with this when they become older dogs. So it is a very poor reflection of the liability for the disease. And the very high frequency, over 50% of your breed is either a carrier or at risk for carrying this liability gene. And if it's not directly linked to clinical disease in your breed, then you're eliminating over 50% of your gene pool due to a gene that rarely causes disease in your breed. It doesn't even exist as a disease on your health survey in terms of the frequency of dogs. Out of 878, I think there was 1 or 2 dogs that people said my dog's affected, and maybe one of those 2 people only checked it off because their dog tested homozygous and isn't even showing clinical signs. So it's I'm not saying it doesn't exist as a disease, but it's a sporadic disease in your breed, not a breed-related inherited disease. And therefore you should not be selecting against this gene, unless there are documented and confirmed close relatives, first-generation relatives diagnosed, definitively diagnosed with the disorder. So by necropsy or pathology, diagnosed with DM and therefore likely carry the other liability genes for this disease. So that is the story on DM. You should not be using that SOD1 test to decide on the breedability of your dogs, or you are greatly limiting the genetic diversity of your breed for something that does not cause inherited disease in your breed. And that is the bottom line. I wrote an article about that. I sent it to your breed club several years ago. I hope you repeat that, and it should be posted on your club website, because this is absolutely something that should not be done. We see a lot of breeds with extremely high frequency of this mutation. The Australian Terrier, the wire fox terriers have a 97% gene frequency for the SOD1 mutation. And out of the history of the breed, there's only been 2 dogs that have been diagnosed with this disease pathologically. And those are the sporadic cases that we talk about, just like the sporadic cases we see. But otherwise, more than half of their breed should be dying of this disease, which they are not. So this is not a test for the disease. It is a test for a liability gene where other genes must be present in that regard. Okay, we are over the 2 hours that we had set aside for this talk, and I'm going to continue on for about 15 minutes or so, and leave 5 more minutes for questions on genetic testing, and to go over the OFA website with you, and then I will provide, as I said, for you reading materials about how to select against genetic diseases and so forth in that regard. And if sometime in the future at a national specialty you want me to do a full breed health seminar that goes over all of those things, as well as analyzing your gene pool, I'm more than happy to do that at some point in the future. So what is responsibility? The dictionary definition is duty, obligation, or burden. And so the question is, what is the obligation for breeders to do genetic testing? Breeders are the custodians of their breeds and their gene pools. As veterinarians, we take an oath above all, do no harm. Breeders must be counseled to use genetic tests for the best interests of their breed. So what is the expectation of the general public? At one point, over 20 years ago, I Googled general public to get an image, and this was one of the images that came up, and I thought it was very funny. I put it into the slides, and I guess, and now after COVID, it, maybe it's not as funny anymore, but at any rate, what is the expectation of the general public? It's that quality control for genetic disease is being done. And the thing is that the public believes that as breeders, you are all doing genetic screening, and you're not all doing genetic screening. And that's the issue that we need to deal with. It's the ethical responsibility and obligation of all breeders to perform genetic health tests on prospective breeding stock prior to any breeding. So here's a motto of the OFA: health tested parents for healthier puppies. All genetic disease cannot be prevented. However, we have the knowledge and the tools to improve the genetic health of puppies. So who is a reputable breeder? It's one that does genetic screening. If not, you need to find a hobby or a profession that you can actually be good at. Because if you're not going to be doing genetic screening and breeding for healthy dogs, then you need to be doing something that you actually can be good at, because you're not good at dog breeding if you are not selecting for health and screening for health. Many tests can be performed during an examination with your veterinarian or obtained inexpensively at local health screening clinics. And on the OFA website, we have a listing of health clinics where you can get, eyes and heart and patellas and hips and even DNA testing done. But the best website that you can go to is this cavalierhealth.org. And where they keep a list of all of the health test clinics in the United States and Canada, and lists them by dates, by cities. It lists what tests are being done: hearts, eyes, blood tests, hip x-rays, and so forth. It lists who's doing the testing, what the cost of the testing is, who to contact to register for them. And here's where you can do your one-stop shopping to get all of your health screening done in one place in one day at a affordable price. So there's no excuse to say I can't afford health testing. It's a pittance of what you get for one puppy to do all of your health testing on a prospective breeding dog. And for most of these tests, it's the only test they'll need to have their entire life for that disease. So let's talk about genetic registries. I like that picture. So the OFA used to be the Orthopedic Foundation for Animals, but it is so much more than what it started as over 40, 50 years ago now. It is now the OFA, the Canine Health Information Center. It's not just orthopedic disease, but all hereditary diseases of companion animals and primarily dogs. So I wanted to go to the OFA website, and so I need to move my share over to, hold on, I need to put this up here. And share that, and why is, there we go. So this is the OFA website. And let me minimize this for the chat. So this is where, when you go to ofa.org, and so you have areas here. If you're a veterinarian, it gives you veterinarian's instructions what they need to do. If you're a breeder, if you're a potential dog owner, so if you're looking to purchase a dog, what questions should you be asking your breeder in that regard? So, and for breeders, it talks to you about the OFA databases, the health surveys and DNA tests and everything else. But in essence, if we browse by breed and we go to the American Eskimo Dog. So here is the chick requirements for the American Eskimo Dog breed. And so a hip radiograph, an eye exam, and a DNA test for PRA. So those are reasonable things to ask for some high frequency issues that your breed has. It also lists optional tests that are not required to get your chick certification. And this just indicates that these diseases occur in your breed. So it can give your veterinarian or any veterinarian advice that these are things that should be looked for as possible issues in the breed: a heart evaluation, elbow dysplasia, luxating kneecaps, thyroid disease, and leg calf perthes disease. So that tells us what our chick requirements are, and here are our applications to apply for our dogs to have those evaluations. If we look for testing statistics for the breed, it will tell us, and this is where I got a lot of the data that I summarized for you. So here are the 89.1% of the dogs whose hips were normal and the 10.1 that were abnormal. Here are the trends by the birth year of the dogs in terms of what percentages of excellence and of dysplastics that we see. Here are the eye examinations, and we can see that the eye exams have improved over time. And mainly, a lot of your dogs early on had PRA, and now that they don't, that you've been eliminating PRA from your breed, we're seeing better numbers there. We have patellas. We have the PRA test, and here again we saw that early on we saw a lot more of lot less normals with PRA, and now we're seeing a lot more normals as those numbers go up over time. Here is your degenerative myelopathy testing, which again is very high frequency in your breed and does not reflect the disease process in your breed. So I would be ignoring that DM test unless you have a confirmed affected dog, which is going to be extremely rare in your breed. And then your congenital cardiac right there. In terms of your health survey, here is the health survey results, which was closed since 2019. So I recommend redoing that. There's a lot of questions about health, about vaccines and flea and tick and heartworm and how you obtain your dog and how big it is and so forth, and adverse reactions and cause of death. And has it had examinations for different things, which I summarized that data for you already, and then what types of test results. And then here is the disease question. So these were the categories of disease that I listed for you with their percentages. And then if you check off on the health survey once it's active again, that you have a cancer or a dental disorder, or whatever, it will then go into a subcategory that says what kind of cancer and ask you questions about those things. So as you can see here, 45% of the cancers were in other cancer other than these malignancies here. And as I said, you guys didn't include lipomas or sebaceous adenomas or benign cancers, which are the most frequent types. So we can't differentiate that from these other more malignant types of cancers, and it makes it look like cancer is your #1 disease that you see in dogs that you have issues with. So when you redo the survey, we need to break where we see other as a very high category. We need to fill in the others that were answered to in the prior survey and use those as checkoffs. And then it has questions about, was this a biopsy? How was it treated? What was the survival? And so forth with cancer. And then the same thing with eye disorders. Cataract, senile cataracts was very high. PRA was very high at that time, and so forth like that. So that's your health survey results there. Okay, let me get through. I want to do something real quick here. Genetic testing is not guaranteed. Genetic companies setting dogs are effective with DM years ago has found okay. if a genetic testing company says your dog was affected with DM, none of them say that anymore. They were saying that initially, and we got them to change that affected to at risk. Because it's a liability gene, but it does not predict being affected. And as I said, in your breed, homozygosity for the SOD1 mutation is in all likelihood, less than 1 or 2% of those that are testing homozygous for SOD1 would ever develop degenerative myelopathy. So I would not use that as a screening test. Okay. Download reports. If you wanted your breed summary for your breed, and it will go into depth on the genetic testing for your breed for these diseases. So here is testing by year for elbow dysplasia. You've done a lot more in the last couple of years. Here's your genetic testing, and then it graphs it out. Here's your genetic testing for eyes. How many dogs have been eye tested each year? It's not a lot. So it isn't a lot of you doing these tests. How many have been done for hips? So you've been doing more lately. Actually, you did a lot more earlier on, but you had a larger population as well, but certainly not as much as we need to be doing in that regard. And here's testing for leg calf Perthes disease and for patellas, so more so lately, which is a good thing. And you can look at this data yourself. Here's PRA testing. You should be filling out for PRA. If both parents tested normal, you can apply for a clear by parentage designation for your dog and get chick certification, even if you don't want to genetic test it. And so you definitely should be doing that, since PRA is one of your chick requirements, and then you can get chick certified. So if both parents have been tested normal, you can get a clear by parentage designation and a chick number on your dog through OFA. And then, and that was PRA. Okay, so let me go back to the, slides here. So the chick DNA repository, I just want to finish up these last couple of slides and then we'll be done. OFA will collect and store for you DNA on your dogs so that it's present for any future research. And that's an important thing for a breed to have. There's a lot of Canine Health Foundation funded research that never got done because the researchers couldn't collect DNA on the affected, on the families of dogs in the, hold on, I'm trying to fix this here. There, on the dogs in the breed to be able to do genetic research. So currently there's 47 American Eskimo Dogs DNA samples that are stored at the chick DNA repository. Half are blood and about half are cheek swabs. We need blood samples. A cheek swab can run a couple of tests and then it's gone. Blood has an unlimited number of amount of DNA. So you could fund PRA for the other PRAs in your breed research. You can fund diabetes research. You can fund pigmentation research. You can keep on going back to the bank and getting DNA to send to researchers for funded research. So it's important to build up your blood DNA repository. And we have, I've seen blood collections at nationals and at any club events where the dogs are assembled, where you can collect DNA blood, and a lot of breed clubs will pay for the storage. It usually is a $20 fee for storage. The OFA, if a clinic is being done, will lower that to $10 for forever storage of DNA for use in research. And most breed clubs will sponsor storage where the owner doesn't have to pay that $10. So it is something that you guys should be doing. You have a very small repository right now. So CHIC is the standard of health conscious breeding. It's an open health database, and dogs receive chick certification regardless of whether there are normal or abnormal outcomes. It doesn't matter whether they pass all those tests or not, but it's just that you have done the proper screening for your dog. And as more testable disorders emerge, every individual is likely to carry some deleterious genes. So it's not about health normalcy, it's about health consciousness. It's being a health conscious breeder. 98 Eskies have achieved chick certification. And I did a research where I took the years 2015 through 2017 and divided the number of dogs that were chick certified divided by the number of dogs that were bred, and that was 2%. So only 2% of the Eskies that are being bred are chick certified, have had the minimum chick certification. So that's a really poor number and a poor reflection on your breed. When we're looking at the middle third again of the all AKC breeds, here's the Eskies. The average for the middle population is 11%, and you're at 2%. Now, there's some overachieving breeds. Belgian sheepdogs are at over 50%, and bearded collies are at 40%, and Caissons are at 40%, and English setters and Swissies. You're at 2%. So your breed club and your breed as a culture does not have a culture of genetic screening before you breed, and you need to get into that culture so that you're actually selecting for health and doing a good job as a breeder. Bred by Heart is an AKC program, and the recommended health tests are the same at hips, eyes, and PRA tests, and it's the same because it's your breed club that makes that recommendation. So lastly, I wanted to take a look at, hold on, I need to do a new share. And okay, so I selected a dog here, Winter Sun's Time Traveler. I don't know if you guys know who that dog is or not, but I selected that dog for a reason. He was born in 2018. It's a male. He's got a lot of letters. He's got a lot of letters after his, I think someone spilled a Scrabble set after his name here. There's so many letters, but at any rate, so a well-titled dog. And this shows all of his health testing. Also, there's a picture of him. This is Winter Sun's Time Traveler's webpage. This is his picture for a $10 donation to the donor advised fund of the Canine Health Foundation, which is money that is only used for health research as determined by your parent health club for Esky research. You can put your dog's picture on its webpage. There are his test results, the age of all the different tests that they were done, the results of those tests. So he's had primary lens luxation test, which is a low frequency disease in your breed, thrombopathia, which is also a very low frequency disease, but he's normal for both those genes. The PRA test, which is a high frequency disease in your breed, is lower now. His patella, his thyroid, elbow, hips, leg, calf, birthday results. Dentition is full. His eyes were normal in 2020 and again normal in 2022. He had developed a type of a cataract, but not suspected as inherited. And so those are his results. We can look at a vertical pedigree. So here is a vertical pedigree of his hips that shows that his hips were excellent. He has 4 siblings that have been tested, 2 good, 1 excellent, 1 either not tested or not listed. So you only have 3 out of the 4 here. So that 4th one either didn't have a hip radiograph done or had an affected hip radiograph and was not listed. Had 2 offspring done, both good. Here's his DAMS results, excellent. 5 siblings, 2 fair, 1 good. 5 offspring, 2 good, 2 excellent. His sire was good, 2 fair siblings, 2 good, 2 excellent offspring, and his grandparents here. So this shows you the breadth, the depth and breadth of pedigree normalcy that we need to see for controlling complexly inherited disease, which is the majority of diseases that your breed has. Here are the elbow results, here are the eye results, and so forth. If we go back and we look for a combined health pedigree, here are all of the health tests on the dog, on the sire, on the dam, and on its grandparents with all of their ratings. So we see all of them, once again, the depth and breadth of pedigree normalcy. So this is how you control complexly inherited disease through use of the OFA website. Okay, and I'm going to go back and finish up the rest of our slides, and we will do some questions. So I'm going to here, and we are going to do that. Okay, so what we didn't see on a lot of the results there was abnormal results. And we need to get into the habit of authorizing the release of abnormal results to the OFA website. And I know that you don't want to report that your dog was affected with things, but most of these diseases are complexly inherited, and the only way we're going to control them is knowledge of affected or carrier status of their close relatives for complexly inherited disease. If it's a one-gene disease like PRA, then you don't need to know that. All you need to know is what your dog tested. But if it's a complexly inherited disease, which includes degenerative myelopathy, but we don't have tests for the rest of those, or any of the other complexly inherited diseases, knowledge of affected status or care or producing affected individuals is important. And so you really should authorize the abnormal results. And here's your percentages for releasing abnormal results on hips. You were doing a much better job of this, almost up to 50% at one point, and then you've gone down again in your percentages. The average for all breeds is 23%. So you're still at or above the average for breeds, but we need to do a much better job in reporting open health results. As long as we keep problems secret, we'll not be able to deal with them. And breeders need to be informed about the problems occurring in the offspring that they produce. So it's really important that that we report the affected individuals here. It's important as a breeder that you contact, I do something, we recommend that on the birthday of every litter you've ever bred, you should contact the owners of everyone that you've sold a dog to, whether it's if you have an email or a phone number, and just say happy birthday to your dog, and as the breeder, you'd like to share that and want to know how they're doing. Even if something's going wrong with them and it's a genetic disease, and that they will appreciate that you are a conscientious breeder and wanted to know about the health problems in their dogs so that you can improve what you're doing as a breeder. Extremely rarely that they will blame you for that if you were the one making the contact. But it's an important thing to do. If you don't know about what's going on with the dogs you have bred, then there's a little difference between you and a commercial breeder who just sells puppies on the internet and doesn't, and whether they care or not doesn't matter, but they have no idea whatever happens to their dogs in terms of health as things go on. You know who you sell to, and you should make that attempt to find out how your dogs are doing each year. The days of stigmatizing health-conscious breeders who have produced dogs affected or carrying hereditary disease are over. And I know that's a pie-in-the-sky statement, but really, it takes a village. You are a village of Esky enthusiasts and breeders, and the stigma becomes those that are hiding diagnoses. If you know that a genetic disease is occurring, if hips or patellas or whatever diseases are occurring in dogs that you have bred, and you're not reporting that, then when you produce it and the people find out through other means that, other people that, oh yeah, those dogs are affected with that, then the stigma's on you for not reporting it and for being non-conscientious about it. So that is all I'm going to do. The rest of it talks about controlling hereditary disease, and I've and that is going to be detailed in the articles that I sent you. But again, it's depth and breadth of pedigree normalcy that you're looking for the complexly inherited diseases, which is the majority of the diseases that we deal with. So let me look here at some of the okay, chick certification should be a requirement, not a choice. In some countries in Europe, they do make these requirements, but this is the what we live with right now. So we do have choices. I hope you choose to to report both normal and abnormal results in your health testing, and that you choose to do CHIC certification, choose to do health screening. How does health screening, if you have a dog that tests as carrier, you breed it to a normal, and then you replace that carrier parent, that quality carrier parent, with a quality normal testing offspring, and you lose that gene in one generation. But it has to be a gene that actually causes disease in your breed, not like degenerative myelopathy, because if you look to replace all your degenerative myelopathy carriers or homozygous dogs, you're just losing your genetic diversity of those quality lines that you spent a lot of time and emotion creating and not breeding and reproducing because of a gene that's not going to cause disease in your breed. So it has to be a valid genetic test. Eskies have been around over 120 years. Wouldn't there be hundreds, if not thousands, of clinical cases of DM? Also, dogs should be DNA tested for 100% American Eskimo. I agree with you absolutely there. If you've got 25% at risk, you should be seeing tons of degenerative myelopathy in your breed. It would not be a rare disease. It would be much more frequent than diabetes or PRA or any of the other diseases that you're dealing with. And DNA testing for background is something that, very shortly AKC is going to have a DNA program. It's voluntary right now, but eventually you're going to be sending in DNA on your dogs that is going to validate the parentage of your dogs. Maybe not, it may still be 10 years, who knows when it's going to happen, but it's what they do for all other, for cattle and for horses, for everything else. And if the purpose of a registry is to document parentage, confirming that parentage is an important part of a registry. If hip dysplasia is a top problem in Eskies, is there a recommendation to not breed dogs with a fair rating? No, there is an article on hip dysplasia that we wrote, and if we do the long portion of the seminar for you guys at any time, I'll go through this a lot more. But if you have a fair, that means you want to breed to an excellent, or the better that you breed your dog to in terms of a hip rating, the better you're going to upgrade your dog to it. So even a mildly dysplastic dog that that has so many other positive contributions, you breed it to a dog that has the best hips it possibly can have, is going to improve the phenotype in the offspring. And it's not just a rating that you're breeding for. If you have a fair dog or a mildly dysplastic dog, what is the reason for that rating? Is it laxity? In that case, you should get a pen hip and breed for a dog with the tightest possible hips. Is it for a shallow acetabula? Then you need to breed for a dog with deep acetabula, and you need to select specifically for the traits that are much more likely to be directly inherited that are causing that aspect of that complexly inherited disease. And again, I would go through that in a longer seminar that talks about complexly inherited disease. Okay, are there any other questions? Either if you want to turn on your microphones or anything. I know it's 9:30 now, so I've gone over. I apologize for that, but I get talkative sometimes, but I do appreciate that we were able to go over a lot of the things that we did go over with you today. If not, Tammy, are we all set?
Yeah, we are set. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bell, for this. This was so very informative. It was a lot of information to absorb and retain, and I look forward to the articles that you'll be sending us. And will we be getting a copy of this presentation as well?
Okay. I don't know if my speakers are working or not, but I'm not hearing anybody.
Oh, you're not hearing me?
Wait, I know what happened. Hold on, I gotta turn this on over here. Yeah. Okay, now I can hear you.
I just said all this wonderful stuff about you, Dr. Bell, and you didn't hear it.
I'll have to watch the video, I guess.
No, but I was just saying that I really appreciate all the information that you provided us, and it's a lot to retain, but I wanted to know if you'd be sending out the presentation along with the articles and suggestions that you mentioned throughout the presentation.
I can send you the PowerPoints. and it won't show the OFA, the website stuff that we went over. I will forward you the articles. And I am more than happy to schedule a full seminar with you guys so we can actually do a deep dive on your gene pool, and we can talk about specifically about how to breed away from these diseases and other things like that. So, so I've given you some basics background here tonight, and certainly there's more that we could talk about in the future.
Well, great. Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm sure everybody on here, you got a lot of great compliments over here on the side.
Okay.
Everybody
One
really-
question here. One question, they'd love to hear my opinion on OFA versus PennHIP. They measure two different things. OFA is measuring everything, both laxity as well as conformation. And it's important, if you do OFA, if you actually read on the OFA website, it tells you you need to do it with general anesthesia, with complete relaxation of muscles, so that you are not masking the laxity of the hips. And there are a lot of unscrupulous radiologists that will go to dog shows and say, I will take your, or even even veterinarians that you can just go to, that will take the hips done without any kind of sedation or anesthesia, and say, I will get you a better rating on your young dog. A lot of dogs already have bony changes, so you can't mask it that much. But for a 2-year-old dog, you can make them look less lax without muscle relaxation, and you're just fooling yourself, because your dogs are going to produce dogs with hip dysplasia. And if you're trying to select against it and improve the hips of your dogs, then you're not going to do it, because you're not going to know who actually has that laxity present in that regard. But in a properly done OFA X-ray under quick general anesthesia or deep sedation, you will see the same laxity that you see in a PennHIP, and I think that they're equal in that regard for that purpose. I don't like that PennHIP does not compare dogs to each other. They'll give you the mean for the breed, but they don't rank or have a database, which is what you need to have in order to select. You need breadth of pedigree normalcy, and there's no way to do that except for each person to do their homework and ask every single person, what was the PennHIP rating on your dog? You can send PennHIP ratings into OFA and have them registered just like any other genetic screening test. So that's one way to deal with it. But those are all the variables between PennHIP and OFA that I can talk to you about. And we can talk more about that in a full seminar as well. Okay, thank you very much. Everyone have a good evening, and thank you for attending.
Thank you. Much appreciated. We'll be in touch.
Okay, good night now.
Bye.